On AO3, there is a user by the name of Sentry of These Lights who conducts yearly statistics on the top 100 relationships on the site. And I find these statistics incredibly fascinating, big surprise there. Not only do these charts serve to showcase the rise and decline of certain fandoms, which ships are the most beloved across the internet, and various other bits of pop culture analysis, but these charts also include very important data on one less than ideal trend in fandom. I want to play a bit of a guessing game. Ask yourself this. How many female-female ships do you think made it onto the top 100 relationships of AO3 in 2025? The answer? 8. Out of 100 relationships. This is but a single example of the larger, wider issue of female-female ships in fandom being significantly underappreciated, underrepresented, and overall given way less attention in comparison to hetero ships and especially male-male ships. There are many, many more examples and many studies on this phenomenon, but I want to talk about this issue a separate day. No, today we will be talking about a side effect of this issue, one that few seem to have noticed, but is quite prominent in many fandoms. This is a phenomenon that I have dubbed the Pity Yuri. Pity Yuri is the term I use to refer to female-female ships that are popular, yet in fanon are not treated with the same amount of depth or attention as other ships, even if those characters do actually have that depth. These are the kinds of ships that are tagged in a fanfiction as a featured relationship, but only maybe have about a chapter of actual focus. These are the kinds of ships that would be deemed quote-unquote cute, but are rarely given any further thought or reasoning by many in the fandom. Essentially, a female-female ship that only exists to fill an expectation. And once you notice the prominence of female-female ships that are treated this way, you can't really unsee it. But how can you tell if a ship is deemed Pity Yuri? What traits define a ship as Pity Yuri? Well, that's what we are here to talk about now. So, to elaborate on my argument, I will now be discussing various examples of this phenomenon from across a handful of fandoms. Let's begin. So for me personally, the best example I have, my default example of this phenomenon, is Blaze Amy from the Sonic the Hedgehog fandom. That being the ship between Blaze the Cat and Amy Rose. Now, I should make it very clear, I think this ship is actually quite nice. I think it has a lot of potential for interesting storytelling and angst. The fan art is always wonderful. But the problem lies with the fact that this potential is never really explored in fan content. This ship is oftentimes just treated as the basic default WLW ship for the Sonic fandom and rarely anything deeper. Like, keep in mind, this is a ship between a princess and an ordinary person who are separated across a dimensional barrier, and one of these characters is deeply emotional while the other struggles to express more intense emotions. Am I seriously supposed to believe the most you can say about this ship that you are supposedly enjoying is that it's just cute? I don't even ship them myself, but I can come up with more reasoning than that. However, when it comes to Blaze Amy specifically, there is an unspoken factor that I believe most people just don't want to discuss in depth. And that's Amy's fanon treatment, especially in the context of the ship Sonato, the ship between Sonic and Shadow. I've elaborated on the intense misogyny Amy has faced in the Sonic fandom in my video on fandom misogyny, but to recap, Amy had often been characterized as just an annoying Sonic fangirl in the fandom for many years. Many people just saw her as irritating and someone who only cared about Sonic's attention and nothing else. This was especially the case in Sonato fanfiction, portraying her as unsupportive in their relationship. Now, even ignoring the fact that this is objectively out of character for her, as shown in the older Archie comics, this is an example of a very frustrating trend in fanon portrayals of female characters. That being the idea that a woman gets in the way of a male-male ship by, simply being around and having a connection to the male characters. Of course, Amy's general existence has literally no impact on Sonato's prominence. I don't think I even need to explain why this is just ridiculous. So, what does this have to do with Blaze Amy? Well, I have noticed a lot of Blaze Amy fics on AO3 are more accurately Sonato fics. My evidence? As I am writing this segment, there are 528 fics tagged with Amy/Blaze. But once I exclude Sonato from the tags, it goes down to 225. As such, I can definitively say this counts as Pity Yuri. I have a bit of a theory that at least a handful of the fics tagged with Blaze Amy are fics that only include the relationship as a way for the author to quote-unquote prove they don't actually hate Amy. You'll see this in quite a lot of fandoms. A female character hated for quote-unquote getting in the way of male-male ships is tossed to another female character as a way to prove a point. But when you still focus all your writing energy on the male characters, it makes it incredibly obvious that the attempt is a shallow one at best. Blaze Amy is a ship that has a lot of potential on its own, but most content related to the ship is actually tied to Sonato, which annoys me quite a lot. And with how little the intricacies of their actual canonical relationship is genuinely explored by those who supposedly ship it, it definitely makes me question a few things. You know, just a few. However, it isn't just Blaze Amy that gets this participation trophy treatment in the Sonic fandom. I have a genuine, serious question. Why does Whispangle barely have any fics focusing on Whispangle? For those who don't know, Whispangle, the ship between the IDW original characters, Whisper and Tangle, is probably the closest thing Sonic currently has to a canonical ship. I mean, yes, I know they technically aren't dating in the canon, and by the law of the mandates are not allowed to date in canon, but like, come on, there is literally a panel of only them with the background being the lesbian flag colors. I think it's pretty goddamn clear. But that raises the question, why are there so few actual fics for them? They are very often a background element in the stories that feature them, to the point where I have seen many in the fandom joke that it's the same 3 people writing for Whispangle, and it's very likely a friend of mine will be one of the names that people bring up. And while I have a lot of respect for these authors, of course, it brings up the question, how is it that this ship can basically be seen as canon in the fandom, but have so few actual character-focused fics? Whisper and Tangle are so beloved, not just because they are so close in canon, but because they have such an interesting relationship. They are stark opposites in personality, but they complement each other so well. They have one of the most important relationships in the entire comic series. And Tangle is essential to Whisper's character development. And of course, this isn't to imply that they are only interesting with each other, and that's why they're such a good ship, far from it. In fact, I think a major reason as to why they are the most beloved IDW original characters is the fact that they are so genuinely interesting, and they parallel each other naturally and bounce off of each other. People seem to like these characters together, but not for the reasons that make them actually compelling. It feels like a lot of people seem to prioritize them as canon queer rep versus being actual characters first and foremost. Another fandom that I believe has a problem with Pity Yuri is Limbus Company. Now, Limbus Company has a much different shipping scene compared to Sonic. The shipping primarily centers around the 12 playable characters known as the Sinners. While there are, of course, other ships that exist, such as Virgilius and Dante, or one of the Sinners shipped with someone from their backstory, the most popular ships are among those 12 characters. And one ship in particular that is surprisingly popular is Ishmael and Don Quixote, known as Ishtan. I say this ship is surprisingly popular because, I will be entirely honest, I straight up do not know why this ship is as popular as it is. Now, that does not mean the ship is bad, far from it, I can see the potential, but in the actual canon of the story, certain Sinners have notable dynamics that are repeatedly written, such as Rodian and Gregor, or Ryoshu and Sinclair. Ishmael and Don Quixote are not one of those dynamics. I can think of, like, 2 scenes where they interact in a meaningful way. Now, I suspect it is because Don Quixote is a very silly character, thus making it easy to pair her up with more serious characters as a way to contrast her personality. That's likely why she is also commonly shipped with Mersault and even sometimes Ryoshu. But I have always been surprised why Ishmael specifically was chosen for 2 reasons. For one, I personally believe Faust is a much more enticing character to pair Don Quixote with if you want a personality contrast. Yeah, that's right. I'm plugging my own Rare Pair Yuri agenda. I think Faudon is an incredibly underrated ship and has a lot of potential, and it provides the contrast people want for Don Quixote ships. It's my video, you get my Rare Pair Yuri agenda! But more importantly, there is already another character who has way more ship fuel for Ishmael. This is actually a common situation when it comes to Pity Yuri, that being when the fandom ignores a more canonically fueled ship for the sake of the Pity Yuri. Why is this the case? Well, it could be as simple as having preference for non-canon ships, which isn't a problem, of course, but it happens so often in so many fandoms that I'll admit I'm a bit surprised in some cases, such as this one. In the case of Limbus Company, the character with more fuel for Ishmael is Queequeg. I won't go into too much detail, because then I would be basically just giving an entire summary of Canto 5, and a very spoilery summary at that, and I have some friends who are currently going through the story of Limbus Company that I don't want to spoil. But if you know, you know. These two have a lot of doomed Yuri shit going on, and also the fact that Ishmael, a woman who canonically hates long hair, grew her hair out to such an insane length just because Queequeg said she liked Ishmael's hair color. Not to mention, I have heard there is even further subtext in the actual text of their literary source, Moby Dick, but I cannot confirm or deny that because I have not read Moby Dick. So, But my point is, there is already potential Yuri right there in Ishmael's story, but it is less often explored. Granted, the ship is not really at a rare pair status, but it is a notable dichotomy. Ishtan only barely has more fics than Ishqueg, but most of the Ishqueg fics seem to have other Ishmael ships tagged, or seem to be focused on several relationships. My best guesses as to why this is the case are the fact that Queequeg is only a major character in one canto, while Don Quixote is a main character, or potentially the fact that Queequeg is a dark-skinned woman and Project Moon fandom is kind of weird about the darker-skinned characters, but you know. Anyway, if anyone who ships Ishtan wants to give an explanation as to why, it would be very much appreciated. Like, genuinely, I really do want to know.
Hello, I'm Sky, and one fandom that I believe has some what would be considered Pity Yuri is Mob Psycho 100. Now, I love Mob Psycho 100. I'd consider it to be my favorite show of all time, but even I can admit that it doesn't exactly feature many prominent female characters. At least, not in comparison to the number of male characters. Heck, only like 3 of them get more than just an episode's worth of focus, which sucks. But they are still good, well-written characters that have dedicated fans of their own, including myself. So, of course, these girls are included in ships, including Yuri ships. However, the lack of female characters combined with the fact that these characters don't even interact much in canon does not give good prospects for the state of the Mob Psycho Yuri market. Technically, you would think these facts shouldn't hinder the amount of Yuri content in the fandom, because in other fandoms, plenty of people make yaoi content for male characters in ships that don't have much fuel in canon, so it would make sense for the female characters to get the same treatment. Right? If that were the case, though, there would be no point in this video. When we take a look at the Mob Psycho 100 tag on AO3, this is the breakdown of how many fics are tagged with each type of relationship option. There are only 297 fics tagged as Yuri out of 12,614 as of May 28th, 2026. That's only 2.4% of all Mob Psycho fics. Utilizing AO3's filters, these are the results when only searching for fics tagged with Yuri ships. Only 2 of the top listed ships actually feature the female characters of the show. The Kurata Tome x Takane Tsubomi tag has 38 fics, the highest number of fics featuring a Yuri ship. Kurata Tome x Misato Ichi has 20 fics, and the rest of the Yuri ships have fic numbers in the single digits. Emi x Misato has 7, Asagiri Minori x Tsubomi has 6, Misato x Tsubomi has 5, and the rest of the possible ships featuring only the female characters of the show have 2 fics or less. Heck, Lesbian Kurata Tome, which is a fairly popular headcanon, is a tag that exists, yet the tag is only featured in 11 fics, and only 2 of the fics with this tag actually feature Yuri ships. This all just goes to show there is not a lot of Yuri content in the fandom. Now the real kicker. When you exclude fics that also feature yaoi ships, the number of fics drops from 297 to 191, about 2/3 of the original number. So from a quick scan of the fics listed, we can pretty safely assume that around a third of the fics that feature Yuri ships only have them featured as background or side elements in their stories, with other types of ships taking more prominent roles. And when filtering out fics with any other types of relationships, the number goes down to 150. So only half of the fics, including Yuri ships, are guaranteed to actually prominently feature those ships. So, essentially, they're only actually featured in fics as pity ships a decent chunk of the time. And another interesting thing I noticed, when you look at the number of fics featuring each Yuri ship, it doesn't actually seem like that many fics overall. At least, definitely not the nearly 300 that there are supposed to be. So I was curious and started skimming through the fics that were listed, only to realize that the majority of them focused on either genderbent or transfemme headcanon versions of the male members of the cast. So the majority of Yuri fics don't even exclusively feature the original female characters of the show. Of course, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with genderbent or transfemme headcanons, but the fact that these fics take up what seems to be the majority of Yuri fics out there, it just goes to show how little attention the female characters are given by the fandom. I know there aren't many female characters to begin with, but come on now. If anyone is interested, when excluding all other relationship types, as well as fics featuring relationship tags with any of the other male characters, these are the ships that you're left with. Truly pitiful numbers.
But it should be noted that what counts as Pity Yuri does not always equate to fanon-exclusive ships. Sometimes Pity Yuri can also describe ships that are actually canon but not really given much further thought in the fandom. A good example of this would be Princess Bubblegum and Marceline from the Adventure Time franchise. Now, these two are pretty famous in the realm of canonical queer representation in kids' cartoons. To confess, I have actually never watched much of Adventure Time, but I, of course, knew about Bubbline. If you were in the cartoon community online around 2018, you knew how big of a deal their kiss in the finale was. However, in the context of fandom content, I kind of feel like there's a bit of false advertising surrounding this ship. Before I met people who were really big fans of Adventure Time and before there was major spin-off material such as the Fiona and Cake show, I had assumed the ship was very domestic and wholesome and fluffy due to how it was always portrayed online. So, come to find out that Princess Bubblegum is like an ultra-controlling leader who is an extremely flawed and complex character who spent most of the show being exes with Marceline, and their kiss in the finale was meant to be them rekindling their love. Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise! Especially because if you look solely at the fan content, you would not realize this was the case. Most of the fan art and fanfiction, of which there is around 2,000 by the way, is very overly domestic in a way that feels a little bizarre to me. Now, to be entirely fair, I am aware that a lot of fanon is designed to give characters what they do not have in canon. So, taking characters with some of the most complicated, elaborate, and emotional backstories in the franchise, and giving them a more slice-of-life post-canon, it does make sense to me. However, it also feels a little inaccurate to these characters and the story they went through to depict them as just that. It feels like so many people online rave about Toxic Yuri, but when given a ship with canonical centuries of history and Toxic Yuri potential and a canonical AU where they are enemies, why is all the fan content just so overly fluffy? Both PB and Marceline are hundreds of years old, so why do so few people seem interested in filling the gaps of that timeline with their own ideas? Now, to my surprise, this lack of character depth to the Bubbling stocks actually had nothing to do with Gumly, the canonical gender swap of this ship. I had originally suspected that the fanfiction effort was being improperly distributed, especially with the focus on the male counterparts in Fiona and Cake, but Gumly actually has less fics than Bubbling. This was a genuine shock to me, if I am being honest, but with that in mind, I am left with more questions than answers. Is it because people didn't feel comfortable acknowledging the more serious flaws surrounding PB as a character? But in that case, I think that's a serious disservice to her character and her writing. Is it because people just wanted to draw them being cute? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but they are obviously so much more than just cute. Is it really because people wanted to portray what the canon lacked? Well, I'm sure there's a way to do that without ignoring the canon altogether. Now, I should make it clear that I have nothing against domestic fluff fandom content. I like a lot of it myself, but it does feel strange when that's all you get for a ship that canonically has a lot more to it. But what do I know? I haven't really watched Adventure Time much. But I have watched Hazbin Hotel. If you know anything about Hazbin Hotel, you probably know exactly where this is going. I am, of course, talking about Charlie and Vaggie. While they are a couple from the start of the series, as opposed to Bubbling, thus arguably having more content surrounding them, I would actually argue Chaggy is less than Bubbling in terms of character exploration, both in fanon and in canon. Now, this is one of the biggest criticisms I have heard thrown around about this show. Vaggie's character as a whole is heavily criticized, but especially in the way her relationship with Charlie is written. And if I am being entirely honest, it is a criticism that I kind of agree with. Vaggie is one of the weirdest characters in the show's history. She is one of the characters who has changed the most throughout development of the story, and despite all that history and her status as a major character, she honestly does not do much in the actual show. She mainly exists to support Charlie and serve as a straight man to the wacky characters around her. You know, despite supposedly being an important character, she feels more like an extension of Charlie rather than her own character. I will let you guys in on a little secret. I am planning a massive video on Hazbin Hotel, and one thing I noticed while doing research for that video was that Vaggie didn't really seem to have any hobbies or interests or even likes outside of things that were connected to Charlie or the hotel, which is also connected to Charlie. On her fandom wiki, the only thing in her list of likes that had nothing to do with Charlie was Nifty's bug band. Personal opinion. If you are writing a character who is in a relationship with another character and their list of interests looks anything like this, I don't think you are writing a solid, healthy, and independent relationship. And considering the Chaggy ship is supposed to be healthy, it unintentionally makes Vaggie look really hollow as a character. I really want to like them as a couple, but the relationship doesn't feel as serious as it should be. Especially because the fallen angel twist was resolved so quickly. I think that's the thing that angers me the most about these two. The idea of a romantic relationship between the heir to hell and a fallen angel is genuinely awesome, but it feels like I know so little about their actual relationship or history. I keep forgetting their dynamic could be genuinely really cool. It feels like they only exist to be a cute Yuri couple without having any thought as to how their relationship actually works. All I'm saying is, Vivzy Pop, you have a chance to redeem this. Season 3 Chaggy-focused flashback episode, please, come on. It would be so good. I've literally never asked for anything ever. Come on, Vivzy, please! So, what are we supposed to take away from all this? I don't want to imply that there is anything wrong or bad about any of the ships that were mentioned today. A lot of them I do see the potential in. And if you enjoy any of these ships, that's awesome! Genuinely, I don't want to shame people for enjoying a ship that is fundamentally harmless. My issue is mainly with the way these ships come across in the wider context of fandom. I understand why Pity Yuri has become such an issue in fandom. Historically, fem/ships have been continuously shoved aside and ignored in favor of yaoi, even in fandoms with predominantly female casts. I understand the desire to have some kind of fem/ship be popular and appreciated because it truly is dire out there. But at the same time, with the way so many seem desperate to cling to any option, it kinda makes me wonder if some of these fans actually care about any of these ships. I doubt this is inherently malicious. More than anything, it's likely born out of guilt. There is a problem with fem/relationship in fandom, so obviously fans want to do something to fix it, right? Believe me, I get that. But when so many fem/ships only consist of the most overly fluffy fics and just fan art of the two embracing and doing nothing else, I just find it the slightest bit aggravating. Especially when in comparison, the het and yaoi ships of these fandoms are allowed to have fics that actually dive deep into the mentalities of these ships, or fan art that is insanely symbolic or representing the story in some way. The only fandoms I can think of where a majority of the fem/slash art is more than just two women embracing are the fandoms for Madoka Magica and Revolutionary Girl Utena. And like, to be fair, I would hope the fan art for these two shows would be more symbolic considering everything about them. I know this probably seems like a nothing burger problem, but to me, it is important to point out. I am well aware not everyone sees it this way, but to me the joy of shipping comes from trying to imagine how a relationship would affect two or more characters. The ways in which they complement each other, the ways in which they contrast each other. I want to dive deep into how the stories would align, how they could help each other, or even possibly make each other worse. There are a million reasons one could come up with for enjoying a ship, especially when you have an extremely niche rare pair. There is so much fun to be had with shipping when you get creative about them. So why does it feel like so many people don't even try with some fem/slash ships? I guess my overall thesis for this video is, it's a lot more fun to try and think about the story your ships create. Also found on peak. Whoa!